been asked to talk to you today about CENDARI and the future of research. And I know a good bit about CENDARI and a little bit less about the future of research, but I'll tell you a little bit about what I know. Thinking about how digital resources have arisen to enhance the practice of medieval studies is one of the things that was at the heart of the inspiration behind CENDARI. And I have tried to gather together a very quick and not at all authoritative list of some of the kinds of resources that we were looking at and thinking of when we envisioned CENDARI. And they fall into a lot of different categories, and this is precisely the problem, and precisely the problem we wanted to address. There are lists of institutions, there are lists of catalogs, there are meta-search engines which allow you to search across different collections. There are structured data, databases, authority lists, dictionaries. There are large numbers of digital collections, from the Irish script on screen to Manuscriptorium, all the way up to the wonderful Mandragore and Gallica of the BNF, the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. So there are huge numbers of collections where you can click through to the manuscripts, but again, they tend to be in national or regional silos and not searchable across the collections. And then there's a lot of tools, things that let you do cool things with the things you find. Virtual Vellum is one that I know, and I've worked a little bit with the team there. But things like Juxta and vMachine and Collex, which allow you to bring collections together or have parallel versions available within a digital output of some sort. I don't want to call it a website, but some kind of personalized digital edition that you might create. And then on top of that, I would also count things like the projects and the networks. CENDARI is a project. It will have certain durable outcomes, but one of its most important aspects is the fact that it is a group of people working together to solve a certain kind of problem. And there's also things like Medioevo Europeo, which is a cost action, which again is a network and quite an extensive one for medieval studies. And then there are projects like MESA. Now MESA is just starting up, but it's building a very interesting model, which I can tell you a little bit more about in a minute. But what the MESA and the 18th Connect and the NINES model is looking to do in the US is to provide a place where scholarly resources that are created that are not published by traditional publishers, so web resources essentially, can be peer-reviewed and can be in some ways put into the pipeline as scholarship, not merely as public communication, but as a bona fide scholarly communication. So it's quite an interesting model, and it's good to see that this development is moving into medieval studies now as well. So wouldn't it be nice if we could take something like Christeller and find some of the very rich information there that is available, but have that feeding into something like Traume, where you can now search across the collections and go deep into the catalogs of various libraries through its system of bringing their catalogs together through something called OPAC, the Open Cataloging. And then, what if we could then enhance all that so that the searches across this data were actually smarter, because what they had underpinning them was some of that structured data. So something that lets you know that an author that you find in one place is the same author that you find in another place by another name. You know, this kind of normalization is very important, especially when you're dealing with a multilingual environment where you may have the Latin next to the vernacular. And then, what if we can then go down to the manuscript level with something like Manuscriptorium? And you can see Manuscriptorium is quite powerful in the way that it can provide the original in various views, an overview of where the original page that you're looking at sits within a larger text, and various descriptions and other metadata that's available there. Then we take that and maybe we put it into something like Juxta, so you can have the image set against your own transcription or another available transcription, and maybe set against an interpretation or another similar version or a translation that you find, but that you suddenly have the power to be doing side-by-side comparison with relevant materials in your own little environment. And then maybe you take what you've created there and you send it off someplace like NINES. And NINES is able to say, yes, this is actually work of scholarly merit. It abides by the norms and practices of the creation of scholarship, and it should be viewed as a scholarly resource and not necessarily viewed as a website that is considered on the same playing field as a Google search and somebody's personal interpretation of medieval studies as gained through watching Lord of the Rings or whatever. So there is a very exciting possibility here for combining these kinds of approaches and these kinds of resources together to create an environment where medieval studies can be done in a different sort of way, but to reach the same kinds of very valuable insight and valuable conclusions that we have always been able to expect and to gain from our scholars of the medieval era. So, incipit CENDARI. So, this is the landscape that we came into, and these are the frustrations among the scholars that we were asked and I suppose tasked by our evaluation committee to address. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about who we are, what our goals are, and what the timescale is, and I'll also talk a little bit about how you can get involved if you find this model interesting. So, we are 14 partners across 8 countries. Another thing that I could go on at length about but won't is exactly how CENDARI fits into the funding landscape of the European Commission. We are a European Commission funded project, and it may be slightly comforting to know that the European Commission has invested €6.5 million into making an infrastructure that historians can use and come to feel is a real enhancement to their work. Not a supplement, not something that is added on, that you go out to, but something that becomes like a library, that kind of comfortable place where you know what is there, you know what you can expect, and you know that it will enhance your work rather than feel like it's making you work differently. So we kicked off in 2012. We're about a year into the project now, and we have, as you see, partners across Europe, including 2 in the UK, 1 in Ireland, and then Germany, the Czech Republic, Italy, France, and so it is quite a large consortium and a good range. The primary aims of the infrastructure as a whole, now mind you, I've been talking about medieval studies, but we do actually have 2 case studies, one for medieval, one for modern, so it is a broader range than that. And we're looking to pilot a research infrastructure. Now, there's lots of definitions of research infrastructures. There's lots of models. The model we always tend to fall back on is, well, infrastructure, think about roads, think about how important roads are, and think about how detrimental it would be if every little community built their own roads and they didn't connect to the other roads. So it's about building something that can help connectivity and help knowledge move around better within the environment. And what we were really tasked to do is to take the analog and the nascent digital resources that were there, the emergent practice of libraries investing some of their resources into creating digital versions of themselves or digital versions of their collections or of part of their collections, and to integrate these digital resources. And that's where you get this vision of bringing together that whole pipeline going through all the tools. We want it to be easy to use, easy to access, and again, essential to research goals. It has to be something that doesn't make people feel that they have to do something differently than they're already doing. It should feel comfortable within the practices that scholars have tested and used over years, decades, centuries. So we have these 2 pilot areas, and for these pilot areas we have a number of overarching goals. It's a technical and a community development. So it is about creating a digital workspace, but it is also about creating a community of scholars. And it's going to bring together these disparate resources, but we don't want to create yet another search and browse environment. This is one of these wonderful technical terms that has come up, because there's so many places where you can go and you can search through collections and you can look at them, and then you go to the next one, and then you go to the next one. CENDARI has to do something different, or we will have failed if we only bring together things at that level. We want to unite library and archival holdings within existing metadata frameworks. And frameworks and standards are one of the most boring and most important things that we talk a lot about, because we want to make sure that we can make things available. We want to make sure that we can make things visible. And we want to make sure that it's easy for content holders to bring their content into CENDARI. And the best way for us to do that is to work with the standards that they use and the standards that are emerging for the describing of different kinds of data. We want to create seamless modes for intake and comparison of data. Again, trying to make it as easy as possible for the scholar to use, and support transnational and comparative approaches across disciplines, locations, and modalities. Again, part of what we were charged to do is to get over the silo approach to analog resources. I mean, analog resources exist in a physical place. Digital resources don't in the same way. So how can we create different ways of looking at history by creating different ways of engaging with data? So in terms of what we need to do in terms of networks, our goals are to network historians, archivists, librarians, e-scientists, and other research infrastructures. And all of these contributing communities should come together and be a part of the vision that is delivered through CENDARI. In terms of the resource goals, what we actually want to create in terms of what's there, we want to overcome the tendency to focus on the well-developed, well-financed archives. We realized very early on that we could build a great infrastructure if all we did was enhance what was already there in, for example, the Bibliothèque Nationale de France and the Imperial War Museum. And somehow then we realized we'd be incentivizing scholars to work on particular topics in particular ways, and on particular topics in particular ways that were already incentivized enough. So we came up with this rubric of a kind of a hidden archive and wanting to provide access to data that currently is hard to access because of language, because of location, because of the economic or the digital infrastructure in that location. And that has been one of the primary goals that we've had as well. And in terms of the technical goals, there's a powerful set of tools and services available. We want to build those into the environment, and things like multilingualism are incredibly important. And if you've ever tried to do a kind of a Google Translate search looking for any kind of information, you'll know that it hides as much as it reveals unless you have a sense of what you're looking for. So we want to find ways of doing that in a more refined manner. Indexes of named entities, something that can underlie the system and know what some of these entities are. Know that München is the same as Munich, is the same as Monaco, depending on the language of the text you're working with. Personalization features. The system can know you, and not in that creepy kind of Amazon way of, people who like this manuscript also like that manuscript, but find ways of actually allowing users to register their intelligence somehow within the system and have that reflected back to them. Shared research and teaching spaces, visualization, annotation trails. And these annotation trails could be quite important because the question of what we create and how we share that and when we share that. And if we share that invisibly with the system, that will make the system smarter. But if we share that visibly with the community, we need a way of protecting that as our thought and as our potential research path. But at the same time, there's a possibility that we might be able to speed up the research process and share results before you find out that you're writing a book that somebody else has actually already started to write, 2 years ahead of you, which actually did happen to me. So I'm quite sensitive to that particular issue. So these are some of the tools and some of the kind of the social aspects of CENDARI that we'd like to be able to enhance and enable through the research infrastructure. It should be integrated, interactive, and inclusive, and it should be technologies that meet researcher and resource provider needs. And there's a number of ways in which we do that. We talk about feedback loops and training programs, and there's a very particular way in which they try and, our partners in France have developed to try and tease out what researchers want without putting something in front of them and saying, okay, this is a Google search, what do you want that's different? Because then you get this kind of, you fix the answer when you fix the question. So what they do is they give people pens and papers and Post-its and video cameras and tell them to, kind of go and imagine their ideal way of working with data. No, it doesn't have to be, bounded by reality. And if you're interested, I can show you one of those little videos in a minute. In terms of timescales, as I already mentioned, we kicked off in 2012. We will conclude in 2016. But one of the things that's interesting about CENDARI is that we are quite intimately tied in with the Daria research infrastructure. And Daria is a digital arts and humanities research infrastructure, but it's on a different level than we are, because what Daria is it's long-term and durable. We are a funded project for 4 years. Daria is a consortium of national research agencies that is coming together to say, we think that there needs to be a European central support for digital approaches to humanities research. And that means that what we create will be passed on to Daria, and Daria will be able to sustain that for scholars to use into the long-term future, and to grow it, to migrate it, to continue to invest in it. So, in terms of getting involved, we are always looking for people to get involved with helping us build a good infrastructure, something, again, that people will use, that they will love, and that will be a part of what they do in the way they want to do it. And some of the direct access paths we have for working with us, first of all, we do have an annual summer school, and that first summer school will take place this year in Florence, and we are just in the process of looking at those applications now. So a bit late for 2013, but there'll be 2 more, 2014 and 2015. And the chances are one of the 2 of those will have a strong medieval focus. The other one will probably have a strong World War I focus. This year we have kind of a hybrid focus. So this is something to look out for, because as we get further into the project, we'll actually be able to bring forward the tools and the resource that we're developing, and allow people to test it, to influence it, to tell us that it's wrong, to tell us what's right. And then we can channel our effort into the priority areas for the scholars who will be using it. We also have Transnational Access Fellowships, which are in some ways similar. It is a by application that these fellowships are given out. But this is to spend between 6 to 12 weeks in one of our partner institutions, Trinity, King's College London, University of Göttingen. There's a World War I infrastructure in Stuttgart, but there's also the Czech National Library is hosting these fellowships from a medieval perspective. And these would be a great opportunity to advance a specific piece of research. We like them to have a close, some kind of added value for the CENDARI infrastructure, but we draw that definition quite widely. So I would strongly encourage anyone who was interested in a fellowship like that to apply. We're going to be forming a trusted users group at some point, probably later this year. And these will be people that when we have something that's maybe kind of fluky and maybe kind of flaky, but we think it might have enough going with it that it's worth having some people look at it, then you can sign on to be a part of this group, and then you can get kind of a first look. And again, we'll be looking very heavily to this group to help us understand what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong in developing the infrastructure. And then we have a number of different kinds of meetings and workshops. And I do have, let's see if I can keep things from falling over on me again. We're still there. This is the kind of thing, again, I was talking about that methodology for developing digital tools. And, this is, it's essentially, I can make it a little bit bigger. Yeah, it's essentially, stop motion animation here. But it is a very powerful way of getting people to, one hates to use the cliche, think outside the box, but it is actually, thinking outside the Google box. And this was a particular scholar who said, I miss going to the shelves in the library. I want to know, from a Dewey Decimal point of view, what is this thing that I'm looking at? What's alongside it? And so he imagined this tool that could be done this way, and they did this little video, and that's being fed in to the technical teams as a question for, how they can actually deliver that kind of functionality. So, this is the kind of thing that we end up doing in these participatory design workshops. And one of the things that's most important to remember is that the most valuable scholar, from our point of view, the person we really need to interact with, is the person who has the least use and the least time and the least tolerance for technology. Because if we're only going to build tools for ourselves, if we're only going to build a research infrastructure where people like us can do their work, that, I think, is another mark that we will have failed. What we want is the scholars to come along who would use email because it's useful, who are not, closed to technology, but who are closed to technology that doesn't work for them, and be able to make these technologies work for them. So that's just a list of some of the things I showed at the beginning, in case any of them are useful or interesting to you specifically. I said I'd leave my presentation with the organizers in case, so you're not scribbling down HTTPs. And that's really, that gives you an overview of what we're looking to do with CENDARI. And again, the coordination is based here in Dublin, in Trinity. But there's strong partners, as I mentioned, in Birmingham and King's as well. So if you'd like to get involved with anyone or at any level with the project, we'd be very welcoming of it. And I'd also be very welcoming of some questions if you have them. Thank you.
Jennifer, we have some time for maybe a couple of questions. We'll have a short break for the panel. So, any questions?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Whether they form part of the project, whether they're advising on standards, that sort of thing, or whether they're seeing it more as users who will put an existing source of project, contribute content that perhaps not the design or functionality.
We knew that if we built something and then just said, right, archivists, we've built you this wonderful place, come, that we would have an empty infrastructure. So archivists and librarians have been involved from the very beginning. Part of this is through some of our partners. The European Library and the Consortium of European Research Libraries are both partners in the funded partners in the project consortium. And then we have a very close relationship with the APEX partners. This is the Archives Portal Europe. Two of their representatives sit on our advisory board, and we work very hard alongside them to align, to work with their partners and also to work with their standards. We also have, there's one work package, sorry, the EU terminology for this kind of seeps in, becomes a part of you over time, but the group that is based in Berlin is responsible for the investigation and description of archives. And one of the two lead people there is an archivist herself. And what they are doing is gradually going out to archives and sitting down and saying, look, okay, this is the infrastructure we have. This is the kind of thing that we're doing. We want to make sure that that works with you. And then as we kind of come to an agreement of how we'll work together, we just kind of have a sort of a semi-formal exchange of old-fashioned letters, which I think we then scan and copy and send. But there's a real signature on it somewhere in there. But what that does actually is it allows us to kind of understand on an individual case basis, because the cases are all very different, what the archive needs from us and what we can give back to the archive. So there's a lot of talk about how we can share data back with them and we enhance their data, or if we can help them digitize finding aids, things like that. So they're involved at a number of different levels, and absolutely had to be that way. Yeah.
You said you finished in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering what happens to the project then, as in like what you've done so far.
Mm-hmm.
You said it goes to Daria, kind of. Does it just become an online thing, or?
I would hope so. I would hope that it would become either an online thing or a sort of a hybrid online thing. I use Zotero a lot, and Zotero is something that sort of lives on my computer but is still an online thing because it's able to sync up through the cloud and everything like that. So exactly how one would engage with it, I think the assumption is it'll be online. And the reason why we make that assumption is because we're not looking to kind of create copies of all the data we want to reference. It's just going to be a lot of linked data going in different directions. So yeah, at this point in time, I would say the hope is that we create an online space that you go to and you log in, and then it's like Facebook for medievalists or something like that. I don't know, more useful than Facebook maybe, but that is that's the sort of normal vision we would have now. However, we're open to different models. Like I said, we're open to a hybrid model where you have a module maybe on your own computer. And we're also open if we feel like we haven't quite cracked it. if we feel like what we've come up with is maybe not worth sustaining in the form that we have it, we also will have the opportunity to kind of break it down a little bit. You know, maybe we take the medieval case study and the World War I case study and we treat them completely differently. Maybe we find that certain aspects are incredibly powerful and should be generalized, and maybe those should be highlighted, whereas some of the other aspects aren't so important. And this is really what we have a goal in the last year. There's a whole kind of sustainability plan and handover plan for Daria. And that's where we'll be making these decisions as to what technologies we've developed are really relevant, what workflows we've developed are relevant, what reports we've developed are really important to have out in the community, and which ones are maybe less important. So again, the vision would be that there will be, you know, in 2016, you'll all be doing all your work in CENDARI. But I'm realistic enough to know that we may not achieve everything this time, and so there may be another project that actually takes up what we do and takes it to the next level. It's kind of like a set of stair steps as we develop.
Okay, well, I actually have to leave it there because we're pushing for time. But will you be around to discuss things over coffee?
Unfortunately, I have to run. I was going to try and stay for your coffee break, but I now have to go before that. But my email is also readily available, and I can leave it for anyone who wants it. I'll grab a few copies of my business card and leave them with you. I'm very happy to hear from anyone with questions.
Excellent. You'll actually find some CENDARI information in the conference pass, and there's more stuff just out there on the job.
And actually, that's even better, because if you have that, you can get to me through the info@cendari.eu. Just, you know, put my name on it, and they'll know to pass it on to me as well. So thank you so much. I wish you a great conference, and I hope to see you in a CENDARI context again someday.